So just to recap, yesterday we agreed that Reb Usher is something else. And that's it. Okay. So everybody was surrounded by these clouds of glory. Every single Jew. And that's the meaning that there are 600,000 letters in the Torah, even though we know that there aren't 600,000, but it doesn't matter. The point is that if any Jew is missing, then the whole Torah is puzzled, and the entire Jewish people is missing. So we're on page 40. Learning Likkutei Sichot, volume 2, Parshas Chukat, page 40. ומעניק להם כוח ותוקף לעבור את המדבר הגדול והנורא בלי להתרשם מנחשים, שרפים ועקרבים ולחיות בהלך רוח של מסירות נפש. So the clouds of glory, they are what give the person they empower him to be able to stand up to the world and to retain his holiness in spite of whatever he might need to do within the world. And how do we see that this really affects every single Jew, these clouds of glory? So he says that the Friediger Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, told the story. And Kufat Haftasot beVarsha, when the Nazis invaded Poland, so they in the beginning they bombed Warsaw. And Warsaw had something like 1 million Jews in it, or something like that. Some ridiculous number. Ken. כשכולם חיפשו דרך להסתתר, everybody was looking for a place to hide. הפעם הזדמנה למקום החסה אחד קבוצה שהכילה את הרבי, אנשים בינונים, אנשים פשוטים, וכאלו שתחילה חשבו עליהם שאין להם כל זיקה ליהדות. So into one shelter there came the Rebbe, regular people, simple people, and even people that no one thought had any connection to Yiddishkeit. There was a lot of that in Warsaw. A friend of mine once told me there were 3 Jewish newspapers in Yiddish that came out every day of the week, including Shabbos. Every day of the week. So a lot of Jews that weren't from. But when there was an explosion very near the shelter, they all cried out together, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Even the people that were very distant. So that was true in 1939. Today, that's not true. It's not true anymore. Why is it not true? Because today they don't know that there's Shema Yisrael even. The grandchildren of these people who already in 1939 weren't connected openly to Yiddishkeit, they don't even know that there's Yiddishkeit. They don't even identify themselves as Jews. They don't know anything. In any case, they also are enclosed within these clouds of glory. And they too are given the power to overcome any difficulties there might be in performing Torah and mitzvos. It's just that they don't know that that's part of their job in the world. When we come to the Yechida, the highest part of the soul, the 5 parts of the soul, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. Le'etem Anshama, even higher to the essence, to the substance of the soul. Sorry, not the essence. The substance of the soul, which is higher than the 5 parts of the soul. It's a substance itself. Omnam kashe להגיע אליה, it's difficult to reach it, אך כשמגיעים אליה, אם בדרך דוגמה אמורה, או בדרכי נועם, משמיע גם הקהל שבקהלים קריאת שמע ישראל באותו תוקף כשם מנהיג ישראל. So when it is revealed, the substance of the soul, then even the least connected Jew says the same thing, cries out the same thing as the leader of the Jewish people, the Friediger Rebbe. אף כי ייתכן שסיבת הקריאה שמע ישראל אז הייתה בהשפעת הימצאם בדלת אמותיו של בעל נשמה כללית. Even though it could be that the reason they called they all together in one voice, they called out Shema Yisrael, was because they were in the vicinity of the Rebbe, and the Rebbe had an influence on them, a spiritual influence. אך סיבה זו עוררה את היחידה שלהם, וקריאת שמע ישראל נבע מן היחידה שלהם עצמם. But the idea is that it awakens the yechida, it awakens the singular one, the highest level of the soul, the substance of the soul within each person. And that's why the person himself cries it out, and he doesn't just look at the Rebbe saying Shema Yisrael. They all cry it out. Again, they cried it out because they wanted to be saved. That's what they felt. Or they felt that they were about to die, whichever one it was. But it was the essence of their soul calling out. So this is a very interesting thing, that as the years went by, this was said in 1953, this Sichot. As the years went on, so the Rebbe gave examples of when you can awaken, when each one of us can awaken someone else's yichida. Most famous example being tefillin. If the person's never put tefillin on in his life, so the first time that he does, if you get him a karkafta, you get someone who has never had tefillin on his skull, then you have to stand in awe when he does it. Why? Because the Yechida is now being revealed. You know that. So that's the surrounding light. And that was Aaron's miracle of the clouds of glory. So that every person has both the inner essence of the Torah, what's integrated into the person, which is the manna, and the clouds of glory, which is the surrounding light. You need the transport system, the water in the Torah, Miriam's well. In the same manner, why is it called the water? Why is water the transport system? Because water goes from a high place to a low place. It works by gravity, right? Regular person doesn't say that water is following gravity. It just says the water goes from a high place to a low place. The Torah too, the Torah too came from a high place, from before God, and it enclosed and became words that we understand. Right? That it's a great wisdom, it's a beautiful wisdom that came down. Here it says in an ugly vessel. What does it say in an ugly vessel? The ugly vessel is the body. That's what he describes as the ugly. Meaning, it's the ugly here is not that it's not beautiful; it's that it's the opposite of spirituality. That the body itself is a physical form. That when you compare it to the luminosity of something spiritual, is crude. There's something very crude about it. In any case, it came down into the body. That's where it is, in our brains, in our heads. Still, בכוחה של ירידה זו של התורה מסוגל כל יהודי על ידי אמירת תורה שבכתב ועל ידי לימוד תורה שבעל פה, הוא מסוגל לגלות ולהוציא את המן ואת ענני הכבוד שבתורה. But it's through this reading of the Torah, which is just with the physical mouth, vocal cords, the brain, and you just say these words, what are you bringing down? Two types of light. The inner light that we said is the manna, and the surrounding light, which is the clouds of glory. What does it mean? That you're performing these tremendous miracle every day, just by bringing it down, using the transport system in order to bring down these lights. Just as the water transports the sustenance to all the parts of the body, כך גם המים שבתורה, כלומר פרט זה של ירדה והתלבשה למטה, מביא את המן שבתורה ואת ענני הכבוד שבתורה לכל מחנה ישראל, לכל אחד ואחת מישראל, בכל הדרוש לה ולא ולה, בכל העניינים. So too, when you read Torah, even if you don't understand, like you said here, when you read the written Torah, even if you don't understand what the words mean, but you read it in the original Hebrew, you make an effort and read it in the original Hebrew, or you're learning the oral tradition, and you're learning with an understanding. There you have to have understanding. So you are transporting down for every Jew the surrounding light. You are bringing down the light that protects the spiritual being of every Jew. And you're the one who's bringing down the manna, the inner understanding that every Jew will have when he learns. So we're all responsible for each other in that sense. כך יובן הקשר, section 6, כך יובן הקשר בין המן לבין משה, בין ענני הכבוד לבין אהרון ובין הבאר לבין מרים. This is how we can understand the connection between the figures, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, and what they brought down. Moses brought down the manna, and Aaron the clouds of glory, and Miriam the well. Why? Moshe is called the Raya Mehemna. He's the faithful shepherd, or the shepherd of faith. What does that mean? That he gives each person according to what they need. He teaches, and his job is to teach each person differently. Every person needs something else. So that was Moshe Rabbeinu. Where did we see this? That he knew how to treat each person differently. He's a real king as opposed to the way that people think. The king is not a CEO. He's not meant to run the country. In ancient times, that's what they did, because the king interceded in everything. But the real model of the king is responsible for the spiritual development of each individual. The king takes the role of being responsible to move people, meaning people get stuck in life. They're very content and happy, and the king is there to shake them up. And so the king has to take an interest in every single Jew. He has to know exactly where he is, where he's holding. And when he sees that someone is not living his full potential, he invites him for an audience in the palace. He shakes him up, and he says, "You got to do this, and you got to do that." And he moves him. So it could be that he does it very nicely, but he moves him. He has the power to move you. He says, "No, you can't stay in your job." What do you mean I can't stay? I'm very happy in my job. Yeah, but that's a problem. You're not moving forward. You can't stay in the same place. You have to move forward. You're not living your full potential. I used to think that when the Rebbe told people, "Why do you only come to tell me when things are bad and you don't come to tell me when things are good?" was simply because the Rebbe most of the time took care of problems. But the biggest problem he was interested in was, when are you going to start moving? When are you going to start doing something? That I can't talk to you really. I use a little bit when you come to me. There's a problem, I say add something. But that's nothing compared to what I could do and tell you. If you came to me when things were good and when you felt everything was good, if you come to me then and you tell me then, I can move you. I can make you move mountains. You come to me when things are good. I'm telling you, I'm going to supercharge you. Okay? So that's what the king does. Where did we see this? He was a shepherd. Okay? A shepherd, we know the story that this calf ran away, and Moshe Rabbeinu chased it until he found it. And I told you all my theories about it, that calves don't drink because they suckle. So it's very surprising that a calf would run away. I asked people who shepherd, I say the calves are always near the mother, because that's where they drink from. They don't. So what probably happened was that he was having trouble. Either the mother ran out of milk for some reason, something happened to her, maybe she was ill, whatever. But he couldn't find food, and none of the other, for some reason, none of the other cows would suckle him. It could be that there weren't any. I don't know what the problem was. It wasn't cows, it was sheep or whatever. But he wasn't able to suckle from anyone. So then he started looking for water. And so Moshe Rabbeinu, even though it was against the nature that a sheep should do something like this, or a goat should do something like this, a kid goat, he ran after it to find out, and he followed it to see what the problem was, until he saw it arriving at a well and drinking. And so then he understood the problem and he went and solved it. But that patience of looking at the person and trying to see from their actions what's wrong, what is stuck, what's not moving, and then being able to solve it, that is the sign of inner light, of integrated light, because the integrated light is always made to measure for the person that it's going into. Was according to each person's level. So the manna came down based exactly on what each person needed. So that reflects the integrated inner light that Moshe Rabbeinu is. Aaron was one who loved all creatures. כלומר, הוא אהב גם את אלו שאינם אל הבריות, ולכן נאמר לאהרון, ויבכו את אהרון 30 יום כל בית ישראל. he loved everyone, even those people who are the lowest stature, whose only claim to being important is that God created them. It's quite a bit, but it's not very much. And therefore it says about Aaron that when he passed away, the entire people mourned him for 30 days, which was never said about anyone else. It was always many of the people, or some of the people. ועל ידי האהבה זו לכל הבריות עורר גם בקרבם תשוקה למצוות, למרות שמצד עצמם היו רחוקים מכך. And through his love for everyone equally, he was able to awaken them all to the commandments, to the mitzvos, even though they themselves were distant from it. They weren't so interested. לפיכך היו ענני הכבוד בזכותו של אהרון, שכן בכל דבר קיים הנוהג של מידה כנגד מידה. And that's why the clouds of glory came from Aaron, who treated everyone equally. He didn't discriminate between people who were more wealthy or less, between people who were more observant or people who were less. He saw everyone the same way. Right? It's almost like on Shabbos and Gimel Tammuz, this past Shabbos, I was supposed to teach this Sicha here in the shul. I didn't feel right about teaching it. Why didn't I feel right? Because most of the people who come here are not Lubavitchers. This Sicha is almost like the Rebbe is describing himself. In 1953, this wasn't the reality. The people didn't know that the Rebbe was this type of person. But he was already describing himself. And the last part is the strongest. Miriam, again, he now ties her into taking care of the lowest in the same way that the well created the transport. But let's leave that for now because I want to get to the very end. Okay? Meaning to take care of the lowest is what we just said about before, that the Torah comes from a high place to a low place. And by coming to a low place, that's what allows the Torah to be the transport that is able to bring godliness to everywhere. Okay? That's why it's like a transport system. We're getting to the last section, almost like section 7. It says, when Aaron and Miriam died in Parshas Chukas, nistalku ananei hakavod v'be'er, so the clouds of glory and the well, they disappeared. But they came back in the merit of Moses. What does that mean? It means that even though this wasn't Moses' natural inclination, this wasn't how he usually functioned, he had to start a new line of work. He had to start a new way of functioning in the world. Even though his role was to be the shepherd, to bring the integrated light into the Jewish people. So this new way in which he now functioned, it brought back the clouds of glory and the well also. The true sign of a Jewish leader is that he doesn't concentrate only on those things that he's good at, and those things that he is meant to do. But when there is a need, for that time, he pushes himself aside, he even forgets about his needs entirely, and he completely sacrifices himself for the Jewish people. בשעה של צורך לקרב ליבן של ישראל, גם שפחות שבפחותים לאלוקות, מניח רואה ישראל את ענייניו, ומלמד את בני ישראל א' ב'. So in the time when there's the need to bring people back close to Torah, to Yiddishkeit, to godliness, so the shepherd, the leader of the entire people would be like, exactly, this would be the exact thing which they can't do. These guys, they don't know how to do this. That the prime minister and the president would go not into a classroom. They would go onto the street and they would teach new immigrants from the Ukraine Aleph Beis. Because that's what's needed, because they don't know Aleph Beis. If you really care, even according to your Shita, you don't think they need to know Torah. Okay, but you know that they need to speak. You know that they need to understand the language. How do you show an example? Not just an example. How do you go and actually do it? Go out into the street with a whiteboard, whatever you want, and bring them together and start explaining to them, this is how you read Hebrew. These are the words that we use. And these guys are not there. But that's what the Rebbe did. For 40 years, that's what he did. Basically taught Aleph Beis to people. Pshuto kemashmo. As literally, lamrot shu kohen, even though he's a priest in a certain sense, u'mal kohen bet kvarot, and there are things that we say halachically a priest is not obligated to do, even though he's obligated, but he's free from doing them. For instance, finding someone lost in a cemetery. But the Kohen, the priest, cannot go into the cemetery. So we learn from that a general principle that a person should not be doing things that are underneath his stature. And yet, in these times, the true leader, he goes down to things that are even not according to his stature. Reshaim b'chayim kui metim. These people are like a cemetery. It's like he's going into a cemetery to revive the dead. Even though he's a wise person, meaning that he already has all the wisdom. And the scholar also does not have to return an object that was lost. He doesn't have to dedicate the time to doing it. Why? Because it's better that he sit down and learn and not deal with this mitzvah. You can leave it to someone else. But in times of need, he does do that. That's exactly what he does. He takes care of the little things, the little details. למרות כל זאת, skipping a little, הרי בשעה שנסתלקו אהרון ומרים ואין מי שיטפל בדבר, פונה ראש ישראל להתעסק בעניינים האלה, גם כשאין הדבר לפי ערכו. So when Aaron and Miriam are gone, they passed away, so the leader takes upon himself their duties, even though they would mean that he's now going to have to deal many hours of every day with things that are under his stature. They're not according to his honor. But that's the sign of a true leader.